Hello, everyone. Welcome to another lecture in critical reasoning. In this particular video, we are going to discuss Chapter 6 from the Vaughan text, which is titled Evidence and Experts. So I want to begin here by talking about and bringing to your mind what's known as the Dunning-Kruger effect. We discussed this particular cognitive bias previously at the beginning of the semester when we were engaging with different topics relating to obstacles to good critical thinking. And remember, this is a cognitive bias, which means that it's an error in thinking. It's a kind of a way in which our thinking goes wrong, but it's something that we're not immediately aware of, something that happens unconsciously. So now remember what the Dunning-Kruger effect says is that it's a cognitive bias whereby people with a limited knowledge or competence in some given intellectual or social domain, these people greatly overestimate their own knowledge or their own competence in that particular domain, whatever is relative to the objective criteria to the performance of their peers or maybe people in general. Likewise, those people who are considered to be experts in a particular domain typically underestimate their own knowledge or their own competence in that domain, right? So, put slightly differently, a person who does not really understand or know some particular thing oftentimes takes themselves to actually know quite a bit about that thing, whatever it is we're talking about. Whereas experts oftentimes have some sort of epistemic humility. They do not take themselves to really understand or know things completely or entirely, because they are continuously pursuing and thinking about that thing. There's more for them to understand, more for them to learn. Now, what is it that we mean here by an expert? Like, what are we talking about when we're talking about somebody who is an expert in some field or some area? Well, what we mean is it's somebody who generally has more knowledge or is more competent in some particular field or some domain than the rest of us, than most people in general. So then what does it take to be an expert? How do you become an expert? Well, on the one hand, these sorts of people have mastered some particular skill, right? Take, for instance, a pianist. A pianist is somebody who's mastered the skill of playing piano. Or an NFL football player. This is somebody who's mastered the skill of football. So you can either master some skill, something that you do, or you can master some body of knowledge, right? I received my degree in philosophy, but it wasn't just any area of philosophy that I received my degree in. It was specifically philosophy of mind. Yet at the same point, it was even more specific than that. My particular degree, my dissertation was on mental content and what's known as the phenomenal intentionality theory. So you don't need to know about all of that, but the basic idea is it gets very, very fine grained. Somebody that masters a skill or some body of knowledge is not somebody who knows a lot about all kinds of different things. Rather their mastery in that skill or that particular body of knowledge is very, very limited. It's very narrow. They become an expert at some very specific thing. Likewise, an expert is somebody who practices those skills, uses that knowledge in their daily life, in their occupation, their career, or what have you, right? So the pianist is likely somebody who is a musician as a part of their occupation. Their job, their career likely involves music or playing the piano in some regard. Or somebody who is a football star, obviously that's their job. That's what they do. And even after they're done playing football, they'll probably still be involved in athletics in some regard. Right now, I'm teaching a critical reasoning class, and I'm using some of the knowledge that I gained when I completed my degree in every class that I teach. So what this means is that an expert has the ability to assess and evaluate the relevant evidence, the arguments, and so forth for some particular claim, some particular set of statements that happen to be involved in that relevant domain, in that thing that we're talking about, whatever that area might be. And that sort of a person will count as a legitimate authority with regard to that field or that domain of knowledge. Now we need to compare this to most of us who are non-experts in whatever we're talking about, right? And that's because even an expert with regard to some particular issue, some topic, is a non-expert about many other different things, right? We are all non-experts in lots of stuff. So what about the rest of us then? What should we do, the vast majority of us who are non-experts in all kinds of different things? Well, we must rely upon expert knowledge, right? But that doesn't mean that we should just simply follow blindly whatever the expert says. Rather, you and I need to use our critical thinking skills to carefully think about, sift through the information, the evidence, the claims and beliefs that we come into contact with. We need to think about what it is that the experts are saying. And this means that we can use basic common sense principles that will then help us to evaluate whatever the experts tell us. All right, so what we're going to do in this video is go through some of these common sense principles. The first common sense principle with regard to evaluation of the what the experts happen to say, this first principle, A, tells us that if a claim conflicts with other claims that we have good reason to accept, then we have prima facie grounds for doubting that thing, that particular claim. And remember here that prima facie is just a fancy Latin term that means on the surface of things or at first blush, right? Before we consider anything else, our first sort of take on something, right? So if we've got some claim that we're evaluating and that claim happens to conflict with a whole set of other things that we have good reasons to believe, then we should at least initially doubt that thing. We should not be too quick to immediately just accept it as being true. Now, this involves background information. And the background information that we have is that cognitive information that we are not immediately aware of. Take, for instance, your belief that grass is green. I take it that you probably believe this, but it's not something that you think about, throughout your day. Yet, at the same point, if you wanted to, you could think about it. And so this background information is causally operative in your actions, and your decision making, right? So if you happen to be in a conversation about, the grass, well, then this is something that would be called to your mind. It's something that would be immediately sort of right before your mind's eye, if you will. But most of the time, it's not. These sorts of beliefs that exist in the recesses of our minds, they are there because we don't want to overload our minds with too much information, right? It's important for us to be able to focus on different things throughout our daily go of things. And that means that we need to ignore a lot of other information. This information is considered background. Yet at the same point, we can consider whether or not various claims or various statements or beliefs come into conflict with the background information we have. All right, so this introduces then another additional common sense principle. If what we're saying here about the common sense knowledge that we have, that we typically take for granted throughout our daily go of things, if this is right, then we have this additional common sense principle, which says B. If a claim conflicts with our background information or our background knowledge, then we once again have prima facie grounds to doubt it. So let's make sure that we get clear here about the distinction between these two principles. The first principle, A, is talking about any claim at all, any belief at all, whether it happens to be in the background or something that we think about all the time. If there's some new claim that we come across, some new belief that we're introduced to, and it comes into conflict with any other of the claims that we have good reason to accept, then we should doubt that particular claim, that belief. The second principle here is referring specifically to the background information that we have that we typically don't think about throughout our day. The stuff that we take for granted throughout most of our waking life, if you will. But notice that there actually could be lots of different points when our background information turns out to be false. And that's because we're not perfect. we're not infallible, right? We're creatures that make errors all the time. Every one of us have different biases that are unconscious, that we're not immediately aware of. And again, we saw this at the beginning of the semester when we considered all kinds of different, obstacles to good critical thinking. And so that means that we should always be willing to re-examine what our background beliefs are, the set of beliefs that we take for granted. We should always be willing to update or modify the things that we believe in order to make sure that we are believing things that are consistent. We want to avoid falsehoods and we want to believe mostly true things. And so again, we need to be willing to re-examine our background beliefs, the set of beliefs that we typically take for granted, what we take to be common sense or common knowledge. And if that's right, then we can use that to once again formulate two further guiding principles of common sense. And the third principle, C, says that we should proportion our beliefs to the evidence, right? So what that means is that if we have a lot of really good, strong evidence for some particular claim, then that means that we should be more willing or more likely to accept that claim, that belief as being true. And if we don't have very much evidence, then we should not believe that claim, right? We should proportion our beliefs to whatever the evidence is. Fourth principle here says it is not reasonable to believe a claim when there is no good reason for doing so, when we lack evidence for whatever that claim happens to be. And we can see how this is very similar to what we talked about previously with regard to Clifford, who argued that it's morally wrong, always and everywhere, to believe something on insufficient evidence. Now, of course, Clifford's view might be too strong. And we considered that previously with regard to folks like William James, who offered various different counterexamples to Clifford's view that it was morally wrong or epistemically irresponsible to believe things with insufficient evidence. So, with that in mind, I want you to consider another really important philosopher at the turn of the 20th century, Bertrand Russell, who claimed, quote, "It is undesirable to believe a proposition where there are no grounds whatever for supposing it's true." Russell thought that if these principles were to be widely endorsed by society at large, for instance, in our social lives or in our political systems, maybe even in our education system, well, then society would be utterly transformed for the better. And notice that Russell's claim here is very similar to what we saw with regard to Clifford's claim about it being immorally wrong to believe anything on insufficient evidence. But Russell's claim is slightly different, right? He doesn't say that it's morally wrong. Rather, he says it's undesirable. So this is a way of saying that it's pragmatically in our interests. It would be good for society to believe things based upon good evidence, but he's not saying that it's either morally or epistemically irresponsible or problematic in that regard. He's just simply saying that it's the desirable thing to do. We have good reason to believe things based upon good evidence. It's in our interest. Society would be a better place in this regard. So then that introduces two questions that I want you to consider. First, suppose for a moment that what Russell says is true. Would it follow that many of the problems we currently find in our society are the result of society at large not following these sorts of common sense principles? So I want you to think about this question and what position you would take. Would you agree with Russell? Would you agree with someone like Clifford? Or would you instead agree with someone like William James, who offers various counterexamples? Now, the second question is, what are some aspects of our contemporary society? For instance, things like our social media, our online experience, or even, how politically divided our society is. What are some aspects in this regard where these common sense principles are not embraced or not utilized, right? When we don't utilize these principles, what happens? And is that in some sense epistemically problematic? Now, with all of these points in mind, I want to return to what we were talking about previously with regard to experts. Notice that when a substantial number of experts agree with one another about some particular issue, then we can say that there's a consensus amongst the experts. And with regard to having a consensus, this again generates two more common sense principles. E says if a claim conflicts with expert opinion, whatever that consensus is, then we have good reason to doubt it, right? So if we believe something that is in conflict with what the experts say for instance, if I believe that the Earth is only 8,000 years old, if I believe that evolution is a farce, that clearly conflicts with the consensus that's amongst the experts. And so that means that I should doubt that thing. I should reject or update that particular that belief or that part of my worldview. And F says when the experts disagree about some claim, then we have good reason to doubt that claim or that belief. So again, consider something that the experts disagree about. For instance, the claim that the universe is eternal, right? There's actually disagreement. Some experts believe that the universe had a beginning. Other experts believe that the universe is in some sense eternal. So then, arguably, the right position is a kind of agnostic position, withholding judgment about whether the universe is eternal or not. Simply to say, hey, we don't know. There's reasons for one view, and there's reasons or evidence for the other view. And so maybe we should doubt both claims or withhold judgment until we have better evidence. Finally, when we're talking about experts and whether or not they count as a legitimate authority, we need to be careful not to fall victim to a fallacious appeal to authority. This is an informal kind of fallacy whereby we mistakenly take someone to be an expert or treat somebody as an expert when they're not an expert. This happens all the time. All right. It's perfectly fine to appeal to a authority. We have to appeal to authorities. For instance, if I take my car to the mechanic, because there's some loud banging that's happening under the hood, and I'm not an expert, I don't know what to do. So, in a very real sense, I have to appeal to what the experts say with regard to what's wrong with my car, right? So I should appeal to a good, legitimate source or authority rather than to an illegitimate source or authority. And this can happen in at least two different ways. First, it could happen because someone is an expert in one field, but that doesn't necessarily make them an expert in some other field. An example that I like to use here is someone like Jordan Peterson. Now, Jordan Peterson is an expert with regard to the psychology of addiction, right? That's what he got his degree in. So we can use Jordan Peterson as a kind of authority with regard to addiction and how to think about addiction. But notice that Jordan Peterson has published and gone on numerous different podcasts and a whole different tour of giving talks with regard to all kinds of different beliefs that he has, right? We hear Jordan Peterson talking about things like the Rat King or lobsters and how this has to do with different hierarchies. And it's not clear what he's talking about most of the time. And that's because he's not an expert in these areas. Sure, he has lots to say, and he's a very charismatic speaker. And in a real sense, it's appealing to think about what he has to say in these regards. But that doesn't make him a good authority. He may have expertise in one area, but that does not translate to being an expert in all these other areas as well. And so we should be careful not to fallaciously appeal to authority in this regard. Secondly, we oftentimes reify individuals who are not experts into experts because of things like perceived fame or perceived prestige or social status, especially when this happens online. Again, Jordan Peterson is a great example here. We reify what he has to say in all kinds of different areas because we like what he has to say in other areas. We treat him as an expert with regard to all sorts of different things because he's charming and charismatic and influential, right? But that doesn't mean that he's an expert in those areas. So we should be careful in that regard. So then, in order to avoid this fallacy, we can introduce another common sense principle. This common sense principle, which I've labeled G, it says that when we evaluate the claims of an alleged or perceived expert, we should always ask ourselves the following question. Does this person provide us with any good reasons or good evidence for the things that they're claiming, the beliefs that they are asserting? And if they do, then that would be, that would be good, right? We always want to appeal to the evidence or the reasons or arguments for whatever people are claiming, whether they're experts or not. And if they don't have good reasons, if they're just asserting it because it's their opinion or their beliefs, they don't have evidence for what they're claiming, then that would be a reason to doubt it. So that would be a reason to be skeptical of what they're saying. Now, this introduces the topic of judging experts. And this topic of judging experts is really crucial. There's issues that we need to be careful about here. And that is what we will do in the next video.